Open the council. Once again, we are meeting in a hybrid mode with Councilor Robertson, Councilor Osher, Councilor Wingard joining me, Councilor Perry here in council chambers, and Councilor Gardner is joining us remotely. And we are going to have the finance. Oh, and Terry, I'm sorry, he's been there all the time. Councilor Grenier is joining us remotely. We are having a meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee, and following that, we're having a meeting of the Comprehensive Plan Committee. So we will begin with Finance and Operations. I'll just remind people who might be joining us remotely that we are not using the chat function. And if you have any questions or comments, you're more than welcome to contact any counselor by email at any time. And let's continue with Finance and Operations, creation of an Environmental Services Coordinator position to manage compliance efforts related to town MS4 permit and other environmental efforts priorities. And I think that goes to our town manager.
I am going to start today. I hope people can hear me okay. I put this item on the agenda because the town of Orono is one of approximately 28 regulated entities in the state of Maine. By that, I mean that we are one of a very few number of municipalities that carry a municipal separate storm sewer system permit, or as we affectionately call the MS4 permit. That permit comes with a host of requirements related to stormwater, public education and outreach around detecting and detecting illicit discharges and protecting the river from contamination in a variety of ways. It was brought to my attention that I inflated the potential violation for a fine associated with not complying with the permit. I said $30,000 a day per violation. It's only $25,000 a day per violation. So still hefty, but not accurate in my background. So MS4 permits are a delegated authority that comes from EPA to the Maine Department of Environmental Protection. These permits are issued in 5-year cycles. You will note from the background material that we are in year 9 of our 5-year cycle. So it has been a little bit of an issue, an effort to try to get the permit renewed. So the state of Maine deals with the EPA to get a general permit renewed, and then each of the regulated entities are responsible for submitting plans to DEP that get approved as to how we're going to meet those permit goals. Ultimately, even if DEP approves a permit, if it does not meet EPA's muster when they come to inspect, it is our responsibility to meet the general permit. We cannot hide behind, but DEP told us it was okay. So there's, in the background, I really I think I hit some real specific information about why it's important that we comply. And I'm not sure I spent as much time talking about the fact that sitting as the town manager, it is incredibly evident to me that the vision and core value of the town of Orono is to be environmentally sound. And meeting the MS4 permit allows us to be in compliance. However, our staff would believe that to meet the vision and value and expectations of our community, we should be exceeding it. At this point in time, we are having a very difficult time meeting the permit expectations. I talked a little bit about how at the beginning of the 9-year permit cycle, right before that permit began, we had an inspection with EPA here. And we worked very hard. It's all we did for about a month was to make sure that we got ready for that inspection. And it became very apparent to us that the way we were managing it through the code office was simply not adequate for meeting EPA's expectations. We came out of that inspection very well because Bell and Rob put in a ton of work to get us up to compliance. When we came out of that inspection, we had created an internal team of people to work on permit, meeting the permit. Rob has in his possession a list of the 80+ tasks that are required for permit compliance. Some of them might take 15 or 20 minutes and others of them might take 2, 3, 4 weeks to do. We divided those tasks up among many different people. And with the thought that more hands would lighten the load. And what we've discovered is it's so integrated that we often spend time trying to figure out whose responsibility it is, or tasks get dropped. And I think Rob and Bell, as the leaders of this, have really tried to step in and find ways to make this decentralized method work. It is not working. And we need, I think, to look at a more centralized method to do that. Now, one way that we could do that is clear somebody's plate, stop doing a whole bunch of things, and turn existing staff person into a stormwater person. One of the issues that we would have with that is that this work is technical and it requires a certain level of technical writing as well as the ability to communicate effectively with groups of people. It is not something that just anybody would have the skill set to do. For me, it would require taking one of my technical, professional, or management level team members and allocating them to this, which I don't have any place for that work to go, the other work to go. So we have been discussing. Rob and I have been discussing, it's not toying, it's discussing, the plan to ask in FY23 for a stormwater coordinator. When we just went through a cycle where we tried to hire for a vacant equipment operator position and once again came up short, it gave us the opportunity to think about reallocating this year's budget to cover this scope of work. And by this scope of work, I am looking at creating a position that's an environmental services coordinator. While the bulk of their work at the beginning would clearly be stormwater, building systems, and getting us to a place where we can manage our stormwater program, I think there are lots of other environmentally related things that this person could do that would help move many town priorities forward around solid waste, around climate action planning, around compliance, technical compliance with other permits that we have. So, I mean, I think while in the background material, I really focused on stormwater, that is because that is where our primary need is at this moment. The plan would be to reallocate the money from this vacant position, understanding that we would be stressing public works through the winter service. This is not a long-term allocation, which is why I'm here. Rob, one of the first things Rob and I would like to look at, and Belle, she's even on camera today, would like to look at, walk through with council is the development of a storm sewer utility to help defray the costs of this person long-term, and also to look at creating financial incentives for individuals to engage in more environmentally sound development practices. So I am here because I think that this is a pretty significant priority for the community. I think now is a good time to implement it. But in doing so, we are looking at an increase in next year's budget. This position would be additive. I'm not asking to take an equipment operator position out of Public Works for all of the reasons that that Rob and I advocated to get it put in several years ago. I think so. We see a net potential increase of between $55,000 and $72,000 in next year's budget. I think the 72 is very high because that's the upper end of a pay scale, and I can't imagine a scenario where we would bring a new person in at the top of a pay scale in this arena. So I think I have summarized. Rob and Bill are active participants in this and are prepared to answer questions that you may have.
Thank you, Sophie. For the record, Councilor Mitchell has joined us. Questions from?
If I could just add
Sure.
just a little bit more about the timing of this. So Sophie mentioned we're in the final year of the current permit. So on July 1st, we'll be beginning the new issuance of the 5-year cycle for the next cycle of permit. So having somebody now who can get ready for that and be ready to hit the ground running in the spring, which is when the lion's share of the work is done. It's kind of why I thought it was important to come now so that we could get the program established and ready. The new permit adds some new layers of compliance requirements that we don't currently have. And so particularly around education outreach. So there are some things that Bell and I need to get moving on before the permit starts, and having this person in place over the winter to begin to work into that is kind of a key factor for us. So that's kind of why we're here now and not talking about it.
Bill, anything that you'd like to add to this?
I think Rob and Sophie have done a great job. Rob mentioned that there's a lot of increased requirements with the new permit. So each successive stormwater MS4 permit gets, the regulations get tighter and more stringent, and EPA says that that is the intent. So while we're looking at this current permit and saying, geez, I don't know that we can handle all of these new requirements, our new target audience is the RSU 26 K through 8 school. So that involves, doing our poster competition, developing surveys for how do we find out what kids know from kindergarten through 8th grade, and doing marking programs and things like that. At the same time, we also have to develop a new program for doing wet weather assessments so that when it rains, we have to talk about how we would sample immediately as soon as the rain, within the first 2 hours of the rain program, and do that, trying to do that with kind of the amalgamation of staff people that are assigned to stormwater now would be difficult versus having a dedicated person. So that's what we're looking at, hoping to get a single person who can kind of manage from education and outreach to infrastructure inspections and, developing new SOPs. And we know they exist. Other communities have stormwater compliance. I think they're called technicians maybe, but being able to add some additional duties. Sophie, is it okay with you if I mention some of the things that we're thinking of?
Yes.
So in addition to doing a lot of stormwater stuff, we're also looking at the solid waste program. So hoping that we can look at a solid waste ordinance revision. How do we do recycling education and outreach? How do we take advantage of activities like Maine Recycles Week and kind of put together activities? We just don't have the staff time to do that right now. And then in addition, just regular landfill permit compliance, doing inspections and data collection. The asset management program for the town, this person would be able to help Rob with doing, maintaining the inventory and capital projects. A lot of the capital project stuff would be kind of storm sewer related anyway. And then kind of an at-large projects person when it comes to environmental initiatives. So, you know, that might be writing grants for getting electric vehicle charging stations, or trying to expand the recycling program, writing grants to support that. So those are the types of things other than the MS4 compliance that we are looking at. First 6 months so that we're ready for the new permit to start on July 1. And then after that, hoping to kind of expand the reach so that we can hit more of the environmental priorities of the town.
Thank you, Bill. Now, questions or comments from committee? Cheryl?
Yeah, so it's also, I'm taking this off. It's also my understanding too that Pat, Esty, and Kyle are impacted by this as well. So taking some of the things off their plates. So it's really 4 staff people that are doing work that one person could do.
More than that. So Joe Madigan is part of that.
WPCF, yeah. And so, yeah, so I see this creation of this, of course, I'm going to express my bias towards the environment. But
Bias.
I have bias toward the environment. I'd like to see us live, especially with the COP26 thing going on right now. I think it's I think that this is innovative. I think this is progressive of Orono to start really thinking about an actual position. And I'm really excited about not just stormwater for the rest of this year, but adding a go-to person in our next budget season. I think it's called for. I think that we are not at a climate, it's a climate crisis right now. And I think municipalities are struggling. And to actually have a position and a person who is educated, the University of Maine is putting out graduates. I mean, it's a job opportunity for some of these environmental degrees that we're seeing now. I'm certainly seeing them on the Environment Committee. I think I've got 4 different people with different environmental policy and environmental sustainability. And I mean, they're just putting out these degrees right now for people to be in these positions. And I really see this as forward thinking for Orono, and I highly support this. And I think we could probably find the salary next year in the budget, because it is a crisis. This is the rain events that we're having that are affecting WPCF that we just met with. I just met with them last Wednesday. Is impacting our infrastructure. It's impacting, well, of course, it's impacting staff time, but these are positions that I think every municipality should be looking at right now in a very serious way, and take advantage of the education that they've got in all different kinds of ways. I think it's timely.
Thank you, Cheryl. Other comments from committee members?
I just have a very nuts and bolts kind of question. How long do you expect it would take to bring a person on board for a position like this?
Yeah.
Okay. So this isn't, we're not searching up until the day the new permit. You expect you to be able to fill this position.
Yeah.
And then where would this person sit sort of in the flow chart of municipal?
This person is going to live at Public Works and report directly to Rob. So it will be a second tier kind of position.
Anything else? Our Zoom participants have any comments or questions?
No questions. I think Cheryl said a lot of things that I agree with. I think that, just to add, beyond just sort of the moral and ethical need to be going in this direction, clearly the fine structure and the repercussions for not being able to fulfill all of the requirements for our permitting. That's a huge issue that this allows us to be proactive in addressing.
Thank you. Anything else?
I just want to add that I'm not specifically about the, although I agree with environmental issues, that's not my driving force. I want to be able to, Sophie, I know that we always put out what the base or that range of salary is, but I think we miss the other things that come with the cost on that. And I ask that when we look at these things, we include, if we're talking about a pay range, that it also includes their health benefits, their vacations. Does that include in that number you gave us?
Pay scale, at least on the current pay scale, which is a whole different discussion. This person would be in with a salary of 41,600 to 52,000, which equates to a budget impact all in of 65 to 82, depending on what type of health insurance they took and where they landed in that 41 to 52 range.
Great, I just want to make sure that included that we knew that. So thank you.
So I just want to emphasize that the reason we're able to talk about this possibility middle of the year is because we are not filling another position for the remainder of the year. So it is within our budget. This is not going to be money spent outside of the current budget. We will have to look at next year and adding the position back in, because you're not going to go without the equipment operator forever. You're going to survive for the next 7 months without an equipment operator.
Yes, and I've had discussions with my staff leadership group to make sure everyone's on that and
Good.
everyone's supportive of that.
That's good to hear. That's a great move.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the next step would be to move this forward to our November meeting. No,
I don't think so,
Okay.
because it is a budget adjustment that's internal to Public Works. I'm here because if I choose to fill that position and bring somebody on, that I'm then gonna come back to you, that would be foolish if you didn't support it, because then I would end up with a highly skilled person that I would have to say,
see you later.
thanks for helping us get this far, but see you later. And I just want to make sure that council's on board with that, but I don't think I'll need any kind of budget adjustments.
Okay.
And it's also my understanding that there's a consultant fee that's also off the table when you hire a person.
I don't know that we're gonna see that immediately this year. I think we could see it next year as part of the budget, but I think it's gonna take time for this person to come up to speed. They're probably gonna need some time with the consulting engineer to be able to do that.
Yeah, my current plan is for that. Once that person gets immersed in the permit and understands all of the tasks, that's when that person should be able to begin to understand what we're using the consultant for and where we can back off of that. But the goal is to, yes, eventually have less reliance on consultants.
Any other questions before we move on? I think you have a lot of support for this move, and we look forward to hearing how the search goes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA fund update.
So, I don't know if I need to take it off or not. In previous committee meetings, we have talked about the American Rescue Plan Act funds that the town is anticipating. So the town has received a little over 500,000 thus far, with they're initially saying another 500,000 next year. These funds have very tight rules associated with them, and they're part of multi-tier funding. So the county is getting significant funds, the state is getting significant funds, and we're also expecting some federal infrastructure funds to come kind of through our waterfall. Many communities have decided exactly what they want to do with that money. Some in the newspaper, you're seeing some controversy with counties and how counties are deciding how to spend the money. We have been in conversation with the county manager, Erica Honey, here in Penobscot County. And they are getting ready to embark on what should be a very public process for determining how these funds are expended. We are all waiting for the final rule. So when rules are promulgated related to how money gets spent, they can be written in a way that is very limiting or in a way that is very open. We have an initial rule that is very limiting in that municipalities can only use this for direct COVID response, preparing to operate through longer pandemic conditions. We could use it for economic recovery to some degree, and we can use it for infrastructure investments. We would consider as part of infrastructure investments that are allowed under this grant, sanitary sewer, storm sewer, or broadband. We are not allowed to use what we would normally think of as infrastructure projects for these. The one item that we have already identified and are just awaiting our internal process for the RFP is to improve our Zoom room capabilities so that we can have more effective hybrid meetings. The federal government has pushed off the reporting requirements, so we don't have to report until March of 2022. It's April of 2022 through March of 2022. And we're still trying to understand how what that's going to look like. Any money that we spend under of ARPA funds, we have to follow Davis-Bacon, which is the prevailing wage rule. So it usually requires higher wages. It most definitely requires more grant administration to ensure that they are compliant with Davis-Bacon, and Buy American, which is another kind of administrative hoop to jump through. So my thought was that on the first meeting of each month, Finance Committee meeting of each month, I would put this item on the agenda so that we don't let it languish and you have updates. My recommendation to council remains that we wait and understand what the final rule is. And we also look at what all of our needs are. Are there things that would work for these funds that would allow us to reallocate some other funds for other things that we want to do, as well as, new things. The new information that I have is I have been cautioned by those who are quite involved in ARPA not to expend the second half allocation because there is some question about whether or not it will actually come through. So when we're thinking about these grant funds, we should either be prepared to just hold it and see if the second half is coming, or simply think about the $500,000. That's what I have at this moment. We have 3 years to expend the funds, so we are not on. We're not running into an issue of potentially losing them.
We have a sense when the final rules are going to be issued.
They keep saying they're coming. And I think talking with MMA, we were hoping to have them before the end of the calendar year.
Questions on this item? Thank you for the update. Look forward to getting final guidelines so that we can really do something with this. We set to move on? Then I'll pass the baton to Megan for Comprehensive Plan Committee.
Okay, so we are going to begin with item 3A, which is an initial discussion of proposed expansion of the village commercial zoning district to include the Orono Public Library, and if I'm not mistaken, a couple of other parcels. And I believe I will be handing the baton to Kyle
Want me to set it up?
or Sophie.
I'm happy to set it up and then give it to Kyle, because he had really big eyes when he looked at me. And Belle, I think Lori Carpenter might be in the public. I don't know. As council may remember, staff is currently working with the Orono Public Library Foundation, which is a separate nonprofit organization that simply exists to raise money to fund the capital needs of the Orono Public Library. So they were instrumental in fundraising a significant portion of the initial library construction and almost all of the village green. I think the town contributed $25,000 to that $400,000 project. So we are working because when the library was constructed almost 10 years ago, it ended up being built at about half the size everybody projected it needed to be because of money. And when they designed it to be built out. The Public Library Foundation has created a building committee that is working with architects right now and a fundraiser to kind of begin the initial process of looking at this expansion. When we look at the expansion, we've gone through a couple of iterations, and the one that seems to perhaps be the most cost effective is expanding towards the front. So if the public library were in the village commercial district, there is no setback at the front of a property line. If it is in the MDR, which it currently is, there is a 20-foot setback. And so when you think about setback, it's from the property line, not from the built infrastructure. So the property line is behind the built infrastructure. And 20 feet significantly impacts the amount of square footage we'd be able to pull that out. So I will, when we looked at the village commercial district, and I think Kyle can tell you a little bit about what the comp plan says. The library, 10 Birch Street, which is the senior center, and 43 Pine Street, which is the side of our parking lot for the library, are all in the medium density residential zone. The 39 Pine Street abuts the current village commercial zone. So we are here to try to ascertain council's appetite for expanding that village commercial district to include what currently many people think of as the library lot, which is just that kind of big section behind. I'm going to pass it over to Kyle to kind of talk about the specifics.
Does anyone need a hard copy of?
I'm happy to see it.
So yeah, the comprehensive plan does touch on this, and I think it's been talked about a few other times since the comp plan was adopted. There's language in there about looking at the boundaries of the village commercial. We've looked at it before on Main Street and I think Forest Ave before my time here. But it specifically says, identify whether any properties at the edges of the existing village commercial district should be rezoned to be included within the district without disruption of other adjacent properties that are zoned residential. So this sort of, yeah, group of lots, it's technically 3 lots, but I think the way the parking is situated between the buildings, yeah, it comes across more as one kind of use with multiple structures on it, especially considering that, yeah, the 3rd lot is 1/10 of an acre, and really half of it is a few parking spaces, and the other half is a sort of drainage area. The village commercial is meant to be a mixed-use walkable district, you know, with commercial, residential, institutional uses. You know, when you think of, you know, the town office, the public safety building, the Keith Anderson building, the post office, and then you have mixed businesses and residential, you know, all of those are in the village commercial. So from that standpoint, it seems to make sense that, you know, sort of on one end of that, you know, sort of capping off the edge of the village commercial on that side of the district, you would have something like the library, which is something that, you know, is a service that you would want people to be able to access, and it gets easily. You know, we have public transit, a shuttle that goes by that area. So I think it sort of fits in with the character of the downtown village district. So this change would really just be to kind of formally include those few lots into the district.
So the only point I would make is when you look at this this kind of hashed area, it looks like it wraps right around these parcels. That is not buildable. That is a gully and wetland. The most of the library lot that can be built on has been built on, except for
Right.
kind of,
It slopes down there pretty easily, you know, and I mean, all of the backs of those lots on the library side and on the backs of the Myrtle Street lot side slope down into that area. And I mean, even if you were to divide basically at the back of the developed portion of the library, you know, if you divided a chunk of that lot off, even if you had the area to make a lot, you don't have any growth frontage back there, so it couldn't be used for anything. Anyway, it's not as if the town could say one day, you know, I want to sell a piece of that and someone else is going to come develop it. It wouldn't be possible. But yeah, that library lot is around 3.3 acres, but yeah, most of the buildable part is already developed. So for a zone change to go through, there would be no actual ordinance amendment for something like this. It would just be an amendment to the official zoning map, but that would have to go to the planning board for a public hearing, and then to the council for a public hearing.
so we're here to find out whether or not you want to refer it on to the planning board or for further discussion.
I was always under the impression that the library was part of the village commercial anyway, so I don't see this as a giant, huge change.
You would not be the only one.
Okay.
I know, I was a little surprised as well. I thought, oh, it's not. Other questions or comments from council?
Are we changing the valuation of the town in any significant way by switching this lot from MDR to village commercial?
No, not at all.
Okay.
This all not taxable anyway, and it would remain that way.
I can't think of any downside to this, but I guess I want to ask our planner or our town manager, is there any downside to doing this?
And so the zone change, I mean, if you were talking about changing the zone of an undeveloped lot and that was just out on the market to be developed, I mean, then there's a little more question because you wonder what it might be used for in the village commercial. You know, you can have anything from a gas station to a hotel to a movie theater to, you know, whatever. But since the uses are already there,
Right.
and the land is pretty much developed mostly to the extent that it can be developed, or a few additions to the existing structures. And it's town-owned land, I don't think there would really be downsides to it. I mean, so long as things like building closer to the property line, fit in with how the council envisions that area from an aesthetic standpoint.
Kyle, could I get you to speak a little bit more directly into the microphone, into Owl? You're
Sure.
starting to fade away.
Other questions or comments about this item?
I think it's great. I would like to see us do this more because it will help us meet the goals of having a larger library without impacting wetlands that are behind the library. And it encourages a more walkable community. When people see a place that's set off from the street and has parking in front of it, then they imagine that you're inviting them to come and drive. And when they spaces look a bit more urban in our downtown where the buildings go up to the street, we're encouraging a walkable community. So I love this idea and I would love to see us do it in more places inside areas that are walkable downtown.
Yeah, I just want to echo, a lot of the comments that were made and also just underline also that according to, our background materials, that this kind of approach to building out the library would be cost effective as well for the town, which is important. Okay, so it sounds like the consensus here is that moving it forward would be the next step.
So this would go to the December, if there's room on the agenda. Kyle is having to deal with the fact that we're having lots of development come forward. And so now I have to actually get if there's enough space, I'll let you on discussion. So if not December, it would be January.
Yeah, there should be room at the December meeting, so that along with the homestead ordinance should be there.
Are there already plans for construction? Is there a date that's or is there a projected?
So the way this works is that Lori and I are participating in these discussions to ensure that when the foundation creates its designs and raises the money that they then gift to the town as a restricted donation, that it's something that we think we would want to build and would meet our needs. So this is one of these projects that ultimately the foundation is going to go through a pretty extensive fundraising effort for. I would think that the town will have to come to the table with some amount of money because an expansion, it costs a lot. It costs a lot of money. But we would have, as the fundraising kicks off formally and concept designs are ready, we would come back to council with those. So we would be in conversation, Cheryl, with council as things become right at each stage, because the last thing that we would want to have happen is to ask dedicated volunteers to be raising money to build a project that council then says, that's not really what we were looking for.
And just as a follow-up to dedicated volunteers, I am so impressed by the work of the Library Foundation. I participated initially in the construction project, and then I said, I can't imagine they're going to be able to raise all that money for the village green. And boy, they got out there and worked and did it, and I'm confident they'll do it again.
All right, moving on. to item 3B, identifying next steps for council or the committee to address concerns voiced related to the livability of certain neighborhoods or areas within the town of Orono. Am I throwing this to you, Sophie, or?
You can take it if you'd like, or you could throw it to me. Up to you.
Okay, well, if maybe, so my plan for this is that I would maybe like, I would like staff to present their perspective of what it is that they need in order to take next steps so that we can then have that constructive conversation.
So I put this item on the agenda for 2 reasons. Just because they're my 2 reasons doesn't mean that they're the only things that we can talk about tonight. But the reason this item was on the agenda was twofold. First, the last time we met, we talked about concerns around the livability of some of our neighborhoods. And I think Webster neighborhood has really kind of been identified here as an example of the concern. And when we were having that conversation, the issue of lack of enforcement came up, which perked my ears up, because if a lack of enforcement means that we have rules that will govern something and that we either are not allocating our resources correctly or we're not doing something we should. So after that meeting, I met with my whole team. So fire, police, code enforcement, life safety, and Bell, all together to talk about what we're doing in neighborhoods and areas of concern. We went out and did multiple reviews of neighborhoods, figuring that the concerns that were raised would legitimately count as a complaint, and were complaint driven. So went out and looked for code violations, looked for life safety violations, looked for, talked with community policing and patrol division to talk about what kind of activity is out there. Webster had already been a place, just because of the density of the neighborhood, that we have active patrols in that area anyway. Went through a discussion with my team. There were a few code issues that were already, we were in enforcement process with, not enforcement, but resolution process. We had not yet hit enforcement. But we did not see a lot of things that were not previously identified and worked on. I think there were a couple of places where people were parking on the lawns. I then pushed this to the community policing division, working with Captain Merrill, asking him to kind of push a activity in that direction, and learned that there was already significant activity underway, had been since March, and that our understanding, based on communication between the community policing director and members of the neighborhood that he had been working with, was that the issues had been resolved. So I want to meet people's needs. I want to meet council's needs. I want to have people who love living in the community, but I'm having a really hard time wrapping my arms around where the enforcement issues are. That's the first issue that I could use some help with. The second, and the other thing that we did immediately following that comp plan committee meeting, we created a form that you click a button on the website, it takes you to a form that you can fill out with your neighborhood concern. That comes to me and to Bell, and then we push it out to whatever department is most appropriate. That we have received one complaint on that. that was not internally generated, and had nothing to do with any neighborhood that has been spoken of at this point. So again, trying to just wrap my arms around what are the enforcement deficiencies. The second reason that I put this on here is that at last council meeting, we had a resident ask for a neighborhood meeting. I'm not exactly sure what that looks like, but anytime a resident stands up at a council meeting, we usually forward that to the next committee meeting of the relevant committee. I thought since we are having this conversation here, this is a relevant committee. So I don't know what you want to do with that. And I also have just made sure you were aware that issues of enforcement relate to current ordinances or state statute. So those are things that we have the ability to point to, articulate, and tell somebody that they need to meet a standard they're not meeting. Creation of new policy or ordinances, before we really got too far down a path of adopting new ordinances or policy, we have to identify kind of what the purpose of that is, what it looks like in very general terms, and then work with Kyle to determine, does that align with our current comprehensive plan so that we could move forward and actually take action right now? Or is that something that we need to deal with when we create the new comprehensive plan, which is coming up in the next couple of years? So an example of that is if we wanted to look at a change of lot size. The comp plan was very specific about that. We have adopted what the comp plan said. If we wanted to do something different, it would not be consistent with the comp plan. Therefore, we need to wait till we were dealing with the next comp plan. That makes sense? Have I laid that out for you?
Yes. So now I'd like to provide a framework for a discussion. And first, I want to make sure that the public watching is aware that this issue, and particularly as it has related to Main Day over the years, and particularly with that Webster Side neighborhood, this is something that has perpetually been in front of council, and that the town has been working on. These discussions have been ongoing for my entire tenure on council as well. And that the public also be aware that we have, just from the recent history from the last couple of months of this being a topic on our agendas, we have emails from residents, we have heard from residents. Many of us have probably had one-on-one conversations with residents about this issue. We also were given in our background material for this meeting an entire kind of dossier of the emails going back and forth between residents of the Webster Side neighborhood and the community policing division relating to different issues like speeding, animal waste, trash and trash cans, noise issues, car break-ins. So just to give the public the information that council is fully aware of the issues going on in some of these neighborhoods. So with that said, what I would like to do now is to first give an opportunity for counselors to ask questions, or even just sort of, just give a comment about what they think about staff's request and the request for the neighborhood meeting, or what that might look like briefly. And then I would like to open it up to the members of the public who have come to the meeting today, but with guidelines. So rather than open it up for general comment about problems that are happening in the neighborhoods, I want to stress and reiterate, we're aware of those specific problems. What I would like to hear from members of the public who wish to speak on these issues is specifically in relationship to what is not being enforced in their view, or in what ways is the town not doing specific things that might alleviate those problems, because that really does seem to be the struggle here, that council and staff are facing right now. So again, not general complaints about students are loud or trash cans are on the sidewalk, because we're aware of those problems, but rather what are specific things that are not being enforced by the town or by code enforcement, by community policing, and that might give us a better idea of how we can better serve these neighborhoods. So all of that being said, first I'd like to open this up to council if there are any questions for Sophie or for Kyle, or comments about what was presented by staff.
So I just want to let you know, I sent Kyle home because I wanted.
Oh,
this-
I can't see what's happening over there.
So I specifically wanted to keep this at a higher level and more about enforcement as opposed to future planning.
Got it. Okay.
I'll start. So one of my questions is, after having read the emails, which looks like about 4 residents from the Webster side, and having lived on the Webster side as a resident, I know that there's another group of neighborhood people, a bigger group of neighborhood people who are not finding the same kind of, who don't have the same kind of I don't know, what do I want to say, angst or experience that these people, and I know these people too, that these people are experiencing, and are really kind of confused about it. Now, these residents that are friends of mine and people that I've talked to regarding this subject have lived in this neighborhood, some of them almost 30 years. So they've seen a range of college activity over the last 30 years, and a range of people kind of coming and going. But the residents that have been in this neighborhood, and I want to say some 30 years, but others have no intention of moving and just don't see. They recognize that this is a college town because they live there, raised their kids there, have done, have been Orono residents for a really long time, but don't see the level of necessity of enforcement. Or, I mean, I think they all agree that there's always a police officer that kind of patrols through there. Has been my experience. So there's also some residents in that area that are a little confused about what the big picture is that these people have been expressing. But I also, reading through all of these emails, it also feels like Ed Lesky and community policing have really done a really good job of stepping in and being diplomatic and having some very real conversations. And so I feel like this is either resolved, or if not totally resolved, at least there's an open line of communication between the town and the residents that are expressing this, that are having these experiences. So I guess I just wanted to just say that out loud. I'm not really clear where the problem is.
Thank you, Cheryl. Other folks from council before we hear from the public?
So I think over time, we've heard not just the recent community concern, but we've heard concern over a number of years in various neighborhoods. And it kind of focuses on complaints about people and complaints about property. The people complaints are loud parties, basically, that's their complaint. And the property complaints involve too many people living in a unit that they're not supposed to be in, and are we enforcing the 3 or 5 people in a unit, or people not parking where they're supposed to park, or, as you mentioned, trash not being taken care of in the way that it is. And it seems that over time, we have developed some ordinances that try to address some of those concerns. I'm certainly concerned about noise. We spent a lot of time talking about a noise ordinance. So I guess I'd want to know either are the ordinances that are currently in place not being adequately enforced, or have we missed something? And do we need to have some additional ordinance to address some of the concerns, which I take as being legitimate concerns from concerned people that want to live in a nice neighborhood?
Thank you, Tom. Other folks?
Megan, my most pressing sort of like concern of this is, you know, we do live in a college town. There are costs to that as well as benefits to that. But I heard from one particular resident earlier this year who said that they were beginning to feel unsafe walking in their neighborhood. And they had great interaction with our community police department, great interaction with our patrol department, and yet they still felt unsafe. And this resident also said that they felt unsafe to a degree that they had not felt when they lived in Bangor or more urban areas. And that sense of sort of unease in our town is disturbing me. I don't know, an ordinance is kind of a blunt instrument to get rid of that kind of behavior. I don't know how we address it as a committee.
So,
But
so I don't discount how people feel at all. And I also want people to feel safe living in our community. When I hear, I feel unsafe walking in my neighborhood, I can't, that's like this, Jeff. I need, why? Is it that it's not well lit? Is it that the world is a different place than it was 10 years ago when you lived someplace else? Is it that we need walking patrols all through the community so that police are walking in the neighborhoods? I need to have a sense of, I don't understand that. And I'm not trying to be like obtuse. I really am not. I get the feeling. I don't know what is causing that feeling, which would then allow us to be able to analyze what, if anything, we could do.
so maybe this is the disconnect, right? Is that we have these people talking about sort of their broad feelings. Town needs specifics in order to act. So maybe we need to have a better instrument to connect those voices with the town. And when I look on the town website, it's difficult for me to find the reporting form. I mean, I'm looking at the town website now. It's there. I mean, I can find it, but maybe we're not doing as great a job in that communication piece as we want to be doing.
So I can tell you one thing that we will do as soon as the election is over and we have a button. We will connect the reporting form to the button on the front of the website. We can absolutely do that. But yes, I think you have absolutely put your finger on the issue of it's not enough to know. I don't want people to feel unsafe. Nobody wants people to feel unsafe, but also what's reasonable. What is reasonable to expect the municipality to be able to address. And in order to be able to determine that, you have to understand what's causing the feeling. Then council can decide, is it worth it? So we have some people along Crosby Street and other streets that are not happy about the perception of speeding. So Rob is looking at, that's tangible. I can say, that is absolutely tangible. So on a short-term basis, we can try speed patrols through the neighborhood, especially at times when we think people might be out walking that might not be seen and would feel unsafe. We've talked about things like trying to address the sidewalk up by Martin Park so it is safer there, and parking near Martin Park so it's safer there. We've talked about speed tables and so essentially like speed bumps and infrastructure investment that would slow people down. That I can take that, I wouldn't even say a complaint, I would say that concern and weave it into our regular municipal process and start evaluating what might be feasible as we look at making investments. I feel unsafe in my community, or I feel unsafe and I'm not comfortable calling the police. I don't know how to address that.
Thank you, Sophie. Actually, that kind of connects to something that I wanted to say about this, just in terms of, my initial reactions. I was a Webster side neighbor before I was a counselor. I no longer live in that neighborhood, but I lived there for many, many years and then was a landlord in that neighborhood. And my home was adjacent to the infamous 100 North Main complex that some of the residents in these emails with complaints were my neighbors. And so I understand very succinctly what the issues living in that particular part of that particular neighborhood are. And I was irritated with a lot of things that were going on as well. The issue, when I think about it now as a town councilor, knowing more about how municipal government operates, is that really the things that were bothering me at the time fall into three different categories. There are things that are just part of living in close proximity to young people. There are things that are landlord issues that need to be addressed by landlords. And then there are things that can be addressed by a municipality. Now, when I was a resident, I didn't think of it in those terms because I didn't know that much about how municipal government operates. I just knew that I was annoyed and at times in danger, like almost getting run over in an intersection, and so all of it lumped together felt like somebody should do something about this. And I feel that when I read the emails or hear from residents in these neighborhoods. And I lived that. But also it is really, for us to be able to do something to help with these issues, we really do need to understand what parts of them can be addressed by municipal government. I mean, just to take my own example of living in Webster side, one of those issues, of course, is on North Main. People do just drive right through all the stop signs on North Main, and that is very dangerous. It's a child-friendly neighborhood, and that can be very dangerous. And so those are things that maybe can be addressed, as Sophie was mentioning, by a municipality, both with public works and with the police department and with planning. But then there are some things that may or may not be able to be addressed by the municipality. So it would be helpful for us to hear specifics from folks. And so at this time, if there are folks either present in council chamber or here on Zoom with me, who would like to speak to that specific part of the conversation, we would be open to hearing that. Any members of the public? I do see one, oh, no, never mind. I do see a hand from Dan Lapointe. I don't know if that's from an earlier question, but.
That's a new hand, so I have allowed him to speak.
All right, Dan? Dan, you'll have to unmute for us to hear you.
He does have two different profile names on here, so I might also try the other one. I'm going to allow that one to also speak. So just in case he's using a phone also.
Dan, are you there? It looks like you're off mute.
Hello?
We do hear you, but you've got some feedback.
Quite a bit. Point of order. Not posted.
I'm sorry, Dan, we're not really able to understand with the feedback. Do you want to try turning, if you have the meeting on volume on another device, you might want to turn the sound off.
Hello? Is that better?
A little bit.
Perhaps this. Hello? Is that better?
It's a bit better. Why don't you give it a try?
Good. Thank you. The point of order, not posted, and I have a great deal of concern about something. It's a terrible thing to say. You could call it a snitch line. Residents have every right to bring their thing forward, but it's difficult if they're not a resident. The idea of facing an accusation or what's behind it, I've always felt as a second-class citizen, the way I've been treated. But I bring this point of order because I have great concern. A sense of safety or a sense of unease is not a good thing. But I have concern about one's property rights. And so it would be nice where a comment wasn't done and that, it be put off to another meeting. And thank you for letting me speak. But I think this is a point of order issue. Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public in chambers or on Zoom who would like to speak to this issue?
We have a gentleman over here, Mr. Leclerc.
Yes, I can only see what the camera is pointing at, so it's a little tricky for me to acknowledge people if I can get some.
We have a seat here. Good evening, my name is Paul Leclerc.
You wanna look there?
Oh, all
This
right.
is a microphone.
Mike over here, I'm not used to that one.
No.
My name is Paul Leclerc. I live in Old Town right now. I would let you know that I was born here in Orono in 1941. Lived here for 18 years before I graduated from St. Mary's Catholic High School. The very last class that graduated from there before they closed it. I left Maine basically because of two reasons. One, because I wanted to follow my father into the US Navy, which I did. Kind of sorry I did in a way because I got seasick 3 times. But anyway, the second reason was because there was not much of any industry in this area other than Strya's Mill and a few woodworking places or fat farms or any of those that people around here would know. I grew up in an area called it was in the lower part of Orono, down on below Pine Street on Elm Street, went around the block to Broadway, all the way down on Mill Street. So I'm well familiar with this area. And one of the things that I was always disappointed is when the people in this town decided that they wanted to put senior citizen housing down there on the ball field. That was an area where us kids used to play baseball, we'll touch football, and hit a golf ball once in a while. It was our playground. It's gone now. And since that time, I came back in 2008 to take care of my very first girlfriend who lived here, and she had COPD, needed a caregiver, and I was her caregiver for 7 years before she passed away from COPD. I love this city, this town. I love the state of Maine. I also was in the Navy for 4 years, and if anybody remembers the Cuban Missile Crisis, I was down there for that in full battle gear on an ammunition ship, so that all of you could do what you're doing now, called freedom. All right, and when I look at things since I've been back here, I find certain things happening that has really gotten me a little concerned. And one was mentioned just a little bit ago about traffic control in this town. And it's happened to me on Outer Park Street. On September the 9th, I was broadsided by a 20-year-old college student. I don't think they stopped when they come out of the intersection because they hit me so hard. It drove me across the road, on the oncoming traffic, and up against that curb. It wiped out the whole front of this young lady's vehicle. It totaled my car. I was driving a 2004 Toyota. That was going to be my last car. It had another 800,000 miles I could drive on. But she told me. And so I didn't get any satisfaction out of that because the police showed up, never talked to me other than to get my identification, went and talked to the other party and never came back to me to get a report. The report was made by the police department and I read it and it was incorrect.
Mr. Leclerc, can I just interrupt you for a second? I'm wondering if the discussion that you are presenting, which we're happy to hear, wouldn't be better placed at a different meeting.
Maybe, but it all wraps in.
We're focusing now on neighborhood concerns. We have some other folks that might want to talk about it. We have a limited amount of
But
time.
I'll
So
wrap it into that because,
if you could do it fairly quickly, we'd really appreciate it.
right, the neighborhood that I lived in down Elm Street, as I said, has been primarily taken over by college students. And that, I think, is what a lot of people are concerned about, because the college students are here as students. They don't care about the people that live in this community. They just want to do their own thing. And they do it. Either they have beer parties, or they smoke pot and get wild. And that's why people in the neighborhood don't feel safe. And the same thing goes for the Webster side, because I had cousins that lived over there. And they knew what it was all about. So that's where the problem is. There's no control over the student who thinks that they can run this town, and they can't. Not on my watch, anyway. Thank you.
Mr. Leclerc, thank you very much. If there are other members of the public who would like to speak to the neighborhood issue. I mean, I know we have some of the neighbors are present. I'm just.
Yeah, maybe you need to come sit over here if you wouldn't mind. Want to speak? And
These things always scare me when I turn on and goes food.
it's all right, it won't go through, but just enunciate towards that.
It won't bite.
Not putting the mask down. Whatever works.
So my name is Jamie Wren, and I'll try and keep this very brief because I was a little caught off guard. I wasn't expecting public comment tonight. So you'll probably all get emails from me later. But I will say that speed was a big issue in Websterhood. I was almost hit like really dramatically. So I reached out to Sophie and they put enforcements, she and Josh did, and those enforcements did help when they had the speed patrols there. So that was greatly appreciated. And speed continues to be an issue. North Main Ave and Crosby Street, the stop signs I'm sure that are all viewed as optional. So something like a speed table would specifically be helpful for us in the neighborhood. The noise issue, there is people who are used to living next to college kids, and there is the issues of, well, we live in a college town, well, we should get used to it. There's that, but then there's the excess that you've all seen documented in emails, and that's really what we're talking about. And the level of safety in the neighborhood. There's been times where I don't feel safe in Webster neighborhood because of speed issues, and I have a hearing disability, so I don't always hear the cars. But then also, you know, we've had hate speech. My husband and I have had hate speech yelled at us in our neighborhood. And I'm sorry, Councilor Gardner, I don't need to bring up, you know, another more litany of the issues that continue to happen. You all are well aware, but it's, when we're talking about safety, that's what we're talking about. And that's not acceptable in any situation. That's not living next to college students for 30 years. That's unacceptable. And it's unacceptable, especially in Orno, of all places. So when we're talking about feeling safe, Sophie, that's really what we're talking about. And I don't have all the answers. I would love to work more closely with council and some of our neighbors to brainstorm ideas, how to make Webster more livable for all of us, how to make us all feel safe. And I just wanted to say thank you to Councilor Gardner for giving us public comment this time.
Thank you, Jamie.
Can I respond to Jamie?
Go ahead.
No, Jamie, and I just wanted to say too that I represent another side of the story, I guess. And so I do hear your concerns. But then I hear also the other, you know, I hear other people and they're older and just been there for a while that want me to say this is another side to this particular neighborhood. So.
Any?
Laura.
Oh, sorry. I was going to ask if I know someone else joined the participants list just now on Zoom. So I was going to ask if that member of the public had joined to give comment or not before we circle back to council. Just sort of a last call for public comment before we circle back to council. Okay, Laura.
Jamie, thank you for coming up and sharing your story, and I'm sorry that you've experienced that. And I want to thank everyone that has reached out to the town, to the council to share their story. And what we've talked about tonight is a disconnect. And I'm sorry that at the last meeting, we did not listen. I think as a council, we have to take every opportunity to listen when residents come and speak to us. And I don't want to base policy decisions on what counselors are hearing for people that are not willing to come speak up. And so I think we need to engage at a community level and have conversations within neighborhoods to hear their experiences, come up with ideas, and continue this conversation. I think there are small things that can be done, and I think there are big things that need to be discussed around housing and quality of life and leveraging the amazing qualities that Orono provides for a quality of life. And how do we build on that in every neighborhood, and reaching out and listening to those people that live in Orono is a foundation of a quality community. And so I think we could, in my neighborhood, I hosted a neighborhood meeting that Ed Lesky presented at. Jeff was there. Jeff helped host that. I think that could be a model for doing something, and we can get notes and takeaways if it's inappropriate for council to be there, or we send a representative. But I am very concerned about not hearing from people and dismissing stories of people coming forward and sharing their experience. I find that very upsetting.
So Laura, I'm disconnecting with you right now because I've been listening. I'm concerned. So when you make that general statement that we're not listening, that really bothers me.
Okay, and I think that there has been comments by certain council members of not listening and choices that have been made maybe not by you, but I've heard it tonight. I heard it several weeks ago, and I just want to reiterate, I think it's vital. And so I'm proposing that we have some format of a neighborhood meeting as a way to continue to listen. And I didn't necessarily walk in thinking that that was needed, but that's what I think matters right now.
So I'd also just like to jump in and say that I do kind of agree with Tom. I don't know that that characterization is really fair. I will say also that at the last committee meeting where we discussed this issue, part of the reason that I did not take comment at that time, and again, we don't frequently take comment at committee, particularly if there are a lot of people present. At that time, we had we had received a lot of feedback already, written form from a lot of the same individuals. This is an issue that we have been listening and hearing from folks for a long time, preceding, you know, your tenure on council. And additionally, there was a pretty sizable group of folks from the landlord community. And quite frankly, the last thing that I wanted as someone who is responsible for facilitating these meetings for my committee, the last thing I want is for members of the public to start feeling like they're pitted against each other in comments and going tit for tat between landlords and residents. I don't think that that would have been helpful to the conversation for anybody. So I chose at that time to kind of put the brakes on that for the sake of being able to work through the issues at hand without it devolving into, you know, conflict between residents. That's the last thing that I want. So again, I just want to gently disagree with your characterization of council's listening to residents. I feel that we really are. And again, I am a former resident of one of these neighborhoods. I also, I just want to ask, because Laura, this has been something that you've been very passionate about. I would really just, apart from the question of neighborhood meetings, I'm curious if you can articulate, again, the first part of what we're talking about here today is this question of a lack of enforcement has been repeatedly brought up. Can you articulate from your perspective what is not being done by the town that could be done by the town?
I don't think that's the purpose of our conversation right now. And so my understanding is the purpose of this conversation is to decide whether, and I'm scrolling back up to the agenda, should we have a neighborhood meeting? It was proposed to us. Let's do that. Here are issues that we've heard about from the comments. What should we do about that? And so this is a 110-page document, so it's taking me a moment.
Let me be more specific. So part of what's been going on in these conversations when this issue is on the agenda is because this is an issue that you're very passionate about, you frequently will say, like, we need to do things, we need to do things. And I'm not being confrontational. I'm genuinely curious if there are specific areas that relate to this, because the first question is not the neighborhood meeting. The first question on this agenda item is about this question of a lack of enforcement that was brought up at the last meeting where we discussed this. Because you have your finger on the pulse of this issue, you know, are there specific things that come to mind for you where there is a lack of enforcement that perhaps this could help us kind of move in a direction?
To me, that's the intention of having the meetings, is to understand. And that's why I don't have the pulse of anything. What I'm saying is people care about this. There's clearly issues and conversations going on around this. I think we need to listen and hear them and understand them better and see how policy can layer in. And maybe it turns out it's a speed table. But that to me is the issue. And I've made a proposal of where we can go. And so that's where I'm at.
Can I add here to try to move us along?
Go ahead.
We do have a format, I don't know that I call it a neighborhood meeting, but we can call it whatever, that we've used before through planning, where we have invited people from a neighborhood to come to town council. We wouldn't do it in somebody's home simply because of ADA issues and other issues. But I would be happy to do that. The issue that I have right now is we've talked about meetings. Are there more than one neighborhood that you would like to hear from? We know Webster side, given the size of that neighborhood, we might break it into two groups, you know, in terms of geography. Are there other neighborhoods that you would want to hear from? Because if we're gonna compile information, it would be helpful to kind of get it all out, I would think.
My thought would be to start with the Webster neighborhood. See if we feel that is helpful, and can we move forward from that? And if it's a good experience for the neighborhood and provides the council with valuable information, then I'd be interested in looking at some other neighborhoods. I'm not sure I'd divide it geographically. I might provide a couple of different opportunities for people, but that's just a logistical thing.
And this is an opportunity to understand what's going on. And there's a lot of great things going on in neighborhoods. And it's an opportunity to have a conversation about that.
So having that conversation with staff and not as a council project allows us to do that without live streaming, which oftentimes I think allows community members to have a little bit more candor. That's been my experience. I mean, I work for you folks. If you want to set it up as meeting with the council, we can do that. I'm just trying to.
So I loved what you mentioned. I understand that it's not ADA compliant to have things in people's homes, but I think that sounds lovely, that you had people in your community together as a chance to talk. And I, as Megan mentioned, some of her past experience, I used to live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and the municipalities encouraged every community to have an emergency response team and phone trees and potlucks and block parties so that you got to know your neighbors. So if there was a chance that you had to have respond in an emergency, you actually knew. Everyone was supposed to have water in their go bag and whatever, but once you had enough of these activities, people actually knew who they would refer to, who they would talk to. They learned a lot about the community, and it was such a wonderful model of how people started to communicate with one another, not just around things that they didn't like and that they were fearful of, but got to know each other. And since having that experience, when I moved to my neighborhood here in Orono, I made sure that everybody had each other's phone number and email address. And I was luckily able to add on to the fact that there were a lot of kids 20 years ago, and again, graduating from high school in the neighborhood. So we had a lot of parties that we were getting to know each other before it was formally me saying, let's make sure we're constantly in contact. So when the COVID happened, we already had an email list where everybody could go back and forth and say, do you need anything? Do you want me to get you something? And I think that's those kind of community networks help. We have rental properties in our neighborhood, and we have had things that were actionable that the town could take action on because we have changed ordinances about noise and about things that attract vermin. And the town did an excellent job. But between just a little bit of discomfort or fear or whatever, or lack of communication and an actionable item, there's a lot of community gatherings that could happen where people support each other. And in our neighborhood, one of my neighbors, the Grinders, told me when I moved in that they said, we always go over to the rental houses and we bring them cookies and we tell them, they said, when our kids were little, we'd say, we're raising kids here. This is how old they are. When you drive fast, it's scary for us as parents. Could you think about that when you're driving? Before there were any problems, they would introduce themselves as their neighbors. And that's another part of the model that I moved into a neighborhood where they already thought about how to manage the interface between those of us who are own houses and lived a long time in a neighborhood and those that are coming through for a short period of time and just learning how to manage their lives outside of their parents' homes in a way that's respectful to their neighbors. So I love the idea that you have the party. And I think that that's, before we get to the point where the town is managing people to talk to each other, that's one thing that we could encourage. We might, because we have a fabulous GIS skilled person in the town, we as a council may ask the town to help us figure out, maybe because they also have some academic training, and how much is the right number. And I know that in the Bay Area, in Oakland where I live, there was an advised number of how big, how many houses would be in these emergency groups. That's something that's a little out of my, I know that in my neighborhood, it just, we just sort of drew a circle, and then people said, oh, can you add these houses too? It's gotten bigger over time. But so anyway, I think it's a great idea, Laura, and I think it gets at that idea of that we want to hear what's happening, but we also want people to interact with one another in a way that they feel supported, and that those who are new in the neighborhood understand that there's already a community they're coming into, and that community could be supportive of them, for example, not just angry at them. And so anyways, I love the idea, Laura, and I think that it's clear that when Sophie says, like, what can I do when someone says they're fearful, that's your job, and your team is amazing at addressing the things, and you brought it to us, to make ordinances that were actionable, that you could do something about it. But I think, so when someone did ask us for a neighborhood meeting, one of the things we would discuss is at what level do we do that? And what Laura, you just suggested, is a way in which we as community leaders could encourage that or attend those, but maybe not all. There's only 7 of us, so we can't be in all the neighborhoods in Orono if they're only a few blocks each. So, but we could agree to attend, and as long as not more than 2 of us attended, it wouldn't have to be televised, excuse me, or whatever we call this. But it would still be us as leaders encouraging people to build community. And again, as we do that, we find all the good stuff about our community, what we like, as well as feeling we have a community that when we say out loud, this isn't working for me, instead of people going, well, for the most part, everything else is fine. We want them to feel heard and to feel like there's some way the community can help them before we get to the point where it's actionable by our public safety staff.
I want to thank Lori for that comment, because I think having neighborhoods and communities work together is essential. It's one of the things that attracted us to move to this town. I love living in a neighborhood. And I think the meeting that Laura facilitated last year with Officer Lusky was a great example of that. It did not involve a council level approval, but I would encourage you to work with your staff to meet with the neighbors in the Webster side, but possibly also the Sailor neighborhood and some other areas of town where we've heard similar issues rise. So I don't necessarily think it has to be a council function to design those meetings, but I think Lori's right, councilors could certainly attend, and we could probably learn a lot from those communities.
I tend to agree with Tom that I think that if we were going to devote staff time, and I would assume that, I think Sophie's suggestion is completely correct, that doing it in a way that is at a staff level, not elevating it to a council level, so that people can have more freedom to speak their mind and not be, on Zoom or forever on the internet. But I tend to agree with Tom's suggestion of starting off by limiting it to perhaps the Webster neighborhood, only because my biggest concern, and this is absolutely not motivated at all, let me be crystal clear, not motivated by a desire to not listen to people or not hear their issues. And again, I'm very intimately aware of these issues, having been a resident of that neighborhood. But we are largely a complaint-driven system here, whether it's code, oftentimes with a lot of police issues or noise issues. There's a lot about our system that's complaint-driven out of necessity for budgetary reasons. So when I'm thinking about allocating staff time, I like Tom's suggestion of starting with one neighborhood, because my my hope is that from such a meeting, staff would learn actionable items that we can help people solve these problems. That's my hope. My fear is that we will have a meeting and only learn what we already know about the complaints in that neighborhood. So I think that starting with one neighborhood to see how it goes, to me, that seems wise, because if that system isn't going to work to gather actionable information, then I wouldn't want to allocate inordinate amounts of staff time to setting up meetings in every neighborhood. That's my 2 cents.
So why don't we try it? I will pull my team together and we'll at least get an initial invitation out. Given the size of the neighborhood, I probably will ask people if they'll kind of let us know that they're coming so that we can plan accordingly for size of gathering. Yeah, let me start it. I will let council know when I'm gonna do it and we'll give a report back to council. I don't know if you wanna name a counselor that would participate with us, or if you'd like us to just go alone. That's outside of Tom or Megan, because Tom's the chair and Megan's the committee chair. I wouldn't just pick a counselor. That's up to you guys to do.
I think it might be wise to just ask council members to let Megan or me know if they would be interested in participating, so that we can, Laura mentioned 2. What's the limit number before it's a public meeting?
You could have up to 2.
Up to 2.
And
Okay.
as long as it's very clear that this is not a council committee, this is a staff committee that we're inviting a couple counselors to attend.
I think it'd be good to have a couple of counselors.
All right, is there anything else on this item before we move to our brief town manager's update? Then I will pass the baton to you, Sophie.
I only have a few things on my brief town manager's update. The first is, along with reminding everybody that tomorrow is an election, so state election
The
tomorrow.
town office is closed.
The town office is closed. We are dealing with some illness, so we only have Shelley and one full-time person. And our intern is assisting in a pretty big way this week. We've been very fortunate to have Eileen. So the election's up on campus in the Big M. If people have questions, they are welcome to email info@orono.org tomorrow, or call the town manager's office, because I will still be there. I wanted to chat briefly because, as people may recall, last year we ran into a problem. I think it was a problem where we had a state primary election in March that was like, I'm going to make up dates, but like the 3rd of March. And then on the 10th of March, we also had to run a municipal election because our charter prescribes our municipal election will occur on the 2nd Tuesday of March. So at that point, we talked about, gee, I think we should really think about adding language to the charter that would give council flexibility in setting the date if there is a state election that is occurring 30 days before or 30 days after. Part of our issue with running one election at the same time is around keeping the rolls open or closed and handling multiple types of ballots. People get confused on what they're voting on and what ballot they're asking for. And it's much cleaner if we could close one and open the next one, or run it at the same time. So looking at the calendar, it looks like if council was open to that de minimis change in the charter, we could call for a public hearing at the November meeting for a December proposed charter change. Then if council agreed, you could sign the warrant in December to put this on referendum at this year's March election. The only time you can do a charter change is at the annual municipal election. I would look for some feedback from the council. I had been thinking that we would leave language that said the municipal election is the second Tuesday in March, with the exception of if a municipal election, if a state election is called within 30 days of the scheduled municipal election would move either ahead up to 30 days or behind back up to 30 days. So again, not a huge change, but one that I think will be a big deal in a couple of years when we're back in the primary world. So looking for your feedback.
Is there a pattern to when primary elections are held?
Yes, Bell's behind the scenes, but I think those primaries are every other year.
So currently it's only for the presidential primary, but Shelley's expectation, because it was very popular, that it will become an every other year event.
I guess what I was also asking is there a pattern as to the time of year it's held?
So this primary we're expecting will be held in the spring because it has to happen before the June, right, Belle?
Yeah, so we had the primary and then still caucuses. So with the presidential process. So the expectation is that it would continue to be probably sometime in March, but it seems like all states kind of move around their primaries for the presidential, and that's been a little more common. But I would expect that it would remain sometime in March.
I guess I asked that because I think if they're close together, it makes perfect sense. I'm not so sure that 30 days, one way or the other, I'm thrilled about, because that could be, our municipal election might be in February, might be in March, or it might be in April.
So 15 days, 14 days, so it's 2 weeks.
Personally, for me, I'd feel much better.
Yeah,
with
I mean,
that.
I'm just throwing
Yeah.
dates out there.
What's the cost of having an election, like to pull that off, rather than combining it, like to have it?
So it's not so much cost. An election will cost us, depending on the size, like what we're expecting for voters. An election will cost us anywhere from $1,800 to $5,000 normally. Municipal elections tend to be on the lower end of the 1,800. I will tell you, Laura, it's not so much about money. It's about staff. It's about the logistics that come with having to manage 2 elections at the same time when you're supposed to be freezing voter lists and allowing voter lists. And we ran into it was a headache behind the scenes for Shelley and our 2 people down front to manage that.
And when you say 2 elections at the same time, you really mean 2 elections close together.
Yeah, so 2 elections happening on the same day feel like one election to us.
Correct.
There might be multiple layers to it, but there's one time frame. There's one set of promotion that can go out. People are calling all voting on the same day. When we held one election on the first Tuesday of March and one election on the second Tuesday of March, we were trying to process hundreds of voter registration changes that happened on the first one in time for people to be able to seamlessly vote on the second one. And I mean, when you think about an election, we all think about the day. When Shelley thinks about an election, she's backing it up 45 to 60 days all the way to 30 days after election is an election for us.
I'm thinking, to be honest, I think Shelley does a wonderful job, but I'm thinking more of the voter, the citizen, than I am about our staff. And I think it makes, in the example you gave of the last primary municipal election, it would have made perfect sense for it to be on the same day for the convenience of the voter.
Absolutely.
Now, it also would be more convenient for staff, but I think we ought to think about the convenience of the voter.
Well, I also want to mention having 2 open absentee ballot processes. So when you have 2 elections in a similar time period and you've got absentee ballots for perhaps the primary and then absentee ballots for the municipal election, and they're both, you know, it might be staggered. One goes out 2 weeks before the next one, but you know, even a 2-week difference means that you still have the absentees are available at the same time, and people understanding what ballot they're requesting and what they're voting is, we dealt with a lot of questions about that. Because people thought that they were requesting the primary ballot and the municipal ballot, or they thought they were just requesting the primary ballot and they got the municipal ballot too. And they just, the confusion was immense, not just for staff trying to deal with the conflicting elections, but also for the voters out there.
Are we looking for a decision right now?
I'm looking for whether or not council wants me to put this on the agenda for next week's council meeting, which would allow, we can even put it under new business to decide whether or not you want to call the election. But I want to just, is there enough interest to pursue that at a council level?
I think your suggestion sounded great, assuming that we want to still continue voting in that time of year. But if long we're looking at changing the charter, there are other towns like Bangor where they vote at the same election that in November, that all other things that are state and federal that are being voted on in November. So, and last time I suggested this was years ago, but then I heard, oh, you have to change the charter. So you're mentioning that a change in the charter. So wouldn't that also be a possibility that we just vote when other towns vote?
Right. I'm gonna have to check to see if that's considered a de minimis change, changing.
Minor changes are easy to make. Major changes have to be made through a charter commission. So the question would be, is combining elections when they're very close together in March a minor change? Probably. Is shifting your election date from what your charter says, the second Tuesday or the first Tuesday in March to November, is that a major change?
Yeah, and I don't know.
I would have to get some information on that.
In the towns that have done that, the turnout is greater. And if our goal for democracy is participation, and there's data to support that changing the date to the time that people expect their state and federal elections to be would make greater participation, then we're moving our town to be more supportive of the democratic process.
Well, I'm not prepared to have a discussion tonight about having a charter commission for that question. But I do see the wisdom in combining if there is a primary in proximity to our municipal election in March. So, I would certainly be interested in discussing it at that meeting next week.
You have the answer about the minimum and the,
Yeah.
okay, by then.
And I will leave the days open and you guys can give me direction on that if that works. My second item also around elections is just to remind folks that we are walking into election season for our municipal election. Nomination papers are going to be available to the public on November 29th. They are due back to the clerk by 5 o'clock on January 6th. And absentee ballots are available to the public on February 7th. So the only other item that we have candidates night, and we pre-scheduled that after some upset last year, trying to schedule multiple people to hit candidates night 2 weeks before we needed to have candidates night. We sat down and determined that the Thursday before, the last Thursday before absentee ballots are available is the date that we're going to hold the candidates night. So that's going to be February 3rd, 2022. I've asked staff to reach out to our incredibly capable facilitator who moderated last year, Dave Chase, to see if he would be willing to moderate again. And we're working on a one-page paper to give to anybody who pulls papers to let them know that this is the night of candidates night, the date, the time. And I'm expecting that we'll hold that on Zoom this year.
Actually, David didn't moderate last year, did he?
Yeah, he did.
He did?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, he did a great job.
He's tough but fair.
He was like quite the comedian.
That's right.
So that's what I have around elections. Yes, ma'am.
So Sophie, a question has come up, and the question, and I may not get this right, but what is the last day to resign? And this is from the school board, I think, to be placed, to have an
I think this-
appointee or to have
Yeah.
someone.
I think this has come up before when we have people who need to resign and they wait until like February or January to resign, and then they want to be on the ballot. You know, they want the vacancy on the ballot. They can't do that. So all the vacancies would have to be listed on the nomination paper. So right before Thanksgiving would be that deadline.
If their term was not expired.
If their term was not expired.
Okay.
So I got one more. This is not happy-go-lucky news, but I have been working with staff, trying to have some conversation with the city of Old Town around us being called to provide EMS services under our mutual aid agreement in communities that they hold contracts. So they're getting paid to provide EMS services in a variety of communities. And we're going free of charge. And it's been significant call volume. I met with the city of Old Town manager and offered that the town of Orono has the BZ contract, and we would absolutely be happy to bill through if they go to BZ for us, what we would make. There is no flat rate in that contract. It is a per call price that we get. Talked with the town of BZ, and they were happy to see that change made just in our practice, that if Old Town goes, Old Town will send us a bill and we'll pass it through to VZ. So that's $225 a call. So VZ is on the way to the hospital and does not take a ton of effort for us. Argyle, LaGrange, Greenfield, Milford, those are all kind of a haul for us. And so we had initially said that we wanted $500 call, and then I went and met with Bill and said, so that's the starting salvo. What is your counter proposal? And have not heard back. So today I did send an email to Bill asking for a proposal. It's been 60 days and letting him know that in the absence of some productive negotiation or a counter proposal, we would be looking to implement the $500 a call charge effective the 15th of November. So I don't know what you might hear about that. My goal, and I said it in the email, is that we would be able to reach a mutually agreeable amount. What's very difficult for Old Town is that they get paid a flat rate. So it's not as easy. I can point to exactly how much money I earn for that call that somebody else is doing for me. So I just want to let you know that's kind of where we are. And
How did you choose the $500? What, like, is that enough? If you're talking about going to like Range or Argyle?
so it doesn't really feel like enough, but it felt somewhat defendable, which is how we chose it. And I would want to hear their rationale for a counter proposal. The running an EMS service is not cheap. And when we were backfilling at a rate of 60 or more calls a year, we're doing an awful lot of work and not getting any remuneration for that.
And they are.
And they are. That's the piece. And the other thing I want to make really clear is that we are not at all suggesting that we should charge for calls that we run in Old Town, and we would not expect to get charged for calls they run here, because that is part of a general mutual aid agreement.
So you're saying we're getting calls from places that are far away and they're under our mutual aid agreement and there are lots of them?
They are not technically under our mutual aid agreement. We have been running the calls because it's just been part of our relationship for years and years and years. And as budgets tighten and we look at where our expenses are and where we're pulling our staff to go in the middle of the night, when quite honestly, my fire department staff is stretched very, very thin right now. And I'm seeing calls to, again, Greenbush, Argyle, LaGrange, Elton. Those are significant drains on our resources that
We don't charge them.
we do not. We never have. And what I'm suggesting is we will start.
I guess I would encourage us to be charging what we need to charge and not something that feels reasonable. Because that's like a long ways away.
So that is almost two times what we're charging BZ. And I'm all for receiving money. I just really wish that we could come together in a joint discussion, because Orono and Old Town need to be able to work closely with one another in the fire service in order to provide good services to our community. So I don't want to see this as the way to line our coffers or to make money, but
No.
rather to be fair.
Right, so if you're called, your EMS crew is called to Greenbush, and that person in Greenbush needs to go to Eastern Maine, and they have insurance, then we bill. So the challenge is if they don't have insurance, there's no one to bill.
Yeah.
Or they have a call that doesn't result in being transported, which happens reasonably often.
Yep, it absolutely does. If we just give first aid on the scene and we leave, there is not a bill.
This would be that you would then bill that municipality.
No, I would bill the city of Old Town. That's what I have been.
Because Greenbush is paying Old Town.
I see.
And we would not respond to a call from the city of Greenbush, the town of Greenbush, or the town of Elton for EMS services were it not for, we get toned because it's an Old Town catchment area.
And we have an agreement with Old Town.
And we have an agreement with Old Town. So that's all.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Yes.